All right, but here's analysis on what happened at the weekend's G7 and what, if anything, it means for us here in Australia. I'm joined from Canberra by the national editor of the Australian newspaper, Mr. Dennis Shanahan. Dennis, great to have you with us. I know it's a public holiday in many places around the country, so you're doing heavy time for us. A lot of chatter about Scott Morrison's meeting with the US President Joe Biden being a trilateral because Boris Johnson joined it, not the originally planned bilateral. Penny Wong even suggested perhaps that Biden was snubbing Morrison over climate change.
Well, I think that's obviously a line that Labor feels they can run. It's always a thing at these meetings, when there's a meeting in the sidelines, does it go for half an hour? Does it go over time? The minders always say, it went for 35 minutes. It was only scheduled to go for 20 minutes. All of this stuff is designed to try and create a sense that the Australian Prime Minister, while travelling, isn't being treated as an equal. I actually take a different view to this position. I actually think that the trilateral meeting is a sign of unity of the Allies rather than disunity between Scott Morrison and Joe Biden. I think that obviously the Prime Minister was going to meet the President. The fact that, and the Prime Minister says Australia initiated the trilateral meeting, I think that the fact that the two most important partners of us in the Five Eyes Security Agreement had a trilateral meeting where they were able to speak face to face, a Six Eyes meeting, if you like. I think this is very important, given that the Prime Minister has just finished meeting Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister Lee of Singapore. He's also met Prime Minister Suga of Japan in Cardiff. So this is a regional issue that they were discussing. It had nothing to do with climate change. When I say nothing, I think the priority was China and COVID. When you look at the communique, it is clear. This G7 meeting has been about COVID, the recovery from COVID, economic recovery, and the idea that China has to be kept in line and that the liberal democracies stand up for their rights. I think that the pre-advertised line that this was going to be all about climate change, people are now scrabbling to try and fill the narrative they had beforehand, when clearly the communique is mostly about COVID, economic recovery, trade, and China.
Yeah, well, you can't help the ignorance of some of your colleagues in the gallery. First of all, you and I know, we've been there. We know how fluid these sideline meetings can be away from the plenary sessions. That's the first point. But also, we've got the COP meetings at the end of the year. That's where the key focus of climate change issues will be. I mean, this is sort of a preliminary dance that gets raised around the edges, but the economic issues are the front and centre here, and obviously China's key in that. Interestingly, and we make this point around the sidelines, there were two deals with Japan and Germany really underscore, I think, the PM's point about lowering emissions via technology, not a tax, he says. An issue with technology signed there with the Japanese Prime Minister, and another accord on hydrogen with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. This is exactly where Scott Morrison wants to be. He's withstanding the critics, isn't he, that says Australia isn't doing enough by demonstrating that we are, and in fact trying to get the rest of them to move beyond just these empty promises for 2050 and focus on what we can practically do in a technology sense. That's the priority for the PM.
Exactly. Look, I think the Prime Minister is taking advantage of what is a COVID pause in the feeling about climate change. He has also been working for more than 2 years on this idea that technology is the answer. And when you look at it, the election of Matthias Cormann as the chairman of the OECD, the whole point about that, the success of his campaign, was that Australia was achieving more in cutting emissions than a whole range of European and other countries. And this is what has happened here. When you look at the communique and you see that what the G7 group has agreed to is an acceleration towards its target of 2050. There was no demand that Australia sign up to a 2050 set target. And all of the language was about technology. It was about technology-driven solutions to climate change. And that's why the Japanese decision on hydrogen is huge. This is a game-changing decision on climate change and on international fuel demands and Japan's industrial centre. This is a big decision. It's been taken in joint with Australia, and as well, Germany, which of course still has nuclear power from France, is actually looking at hydrogen as well. The idea that, you know, you have to sign up for 2050 as the target is the solution, is the be-all and end-all, is not the case. European countries have been failing to meet their objectives. The G7 communique admits that they are failing to meet their objectives and says they must try and get results. This is what Scott Morrison has been talking about for 2 years. And I think that this communique is much stronger for Scott Morrison's position.
Spot on, and they're often written weeks and weeks ahead of these events, but that one clearly, to me, feels like it's been taken out of the room, out of the debate of leaders, so I think that's a good thing.